Good morning, this is John at the National Weather Service in Birmingham. We will be conducting a special webinar briefing here for our partners and including you, our public viewers, here very quickly on social media and also via GoToWebinar for our key customers and partners. We're kind of doing a little bit of housekeeping right now and getting things all together and getting everybody dialed in. But we did want to get online here and get things going for you just a minute. Again, this is John DeBlock at the National Weather Service in Birmingham. We're going to be briefing you about the threat for severe weather on Wednesday, April 5th. We'll get into some of those specifics, but it does look like a very active weather day for much of Alabama, including central Alabama. We will have some specifics in this briefing coming up. Right now we're doing a little bit of housekeeping to get the briefing ready to go for you all, and I'm going to try to head in there right now and see how things are going. So I'm not going to try to walk backwards. That would be a little bit too much of a challenge for me. So let me see. And Kevin is doing a little bit of housekeeping right now to make sure we've got everybody ready to go on the line. We're going to get this briefing kicked off here in just a minute. So I'm going to come on in. Let's go.
Okay, our culprit weather-wise is going to be the old front that came through yesterday. This is going to end up wrecking our day probably tomorrow pretty substantially. This cold front is sort of just sitting here across, you can't really see it on radar, but it sits across the entire northern region of the Gulf and across northern parts of Florida. What's going to happen with it is tonight, probably after midnight at some point, a very strong system is going to just swing out of the central plains. This system is going to be a little bit unusual. It's not our normal setup in that the fact that normally the systems kind of swing out of the Rockies and go through the central plains, and then they develop sort of over Louisiana, Arkansas, then come through Mississippi and Tennessee, and we sort of get to see what happens. So in other words, we think about the larger outbreaks we've had, April 28, 2014, April 27, 2011. We got to sort of see what was happening upstream, and then we got to deal with it that afternoon or that evening. This system is going to be, we're going to be like the Arkansas, Louisiana. So this system is basically going to develop right over top of us. This front that you see draped across the northern Gulf here is going to lift back northward as a warm front, probably about 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning. Once we get destabilized underneath that warm front, that's when all the action is going to start happening. So let's kind of go through some of those steps. Let me pull the slides up here for you. Right now, we have a slight risk. Now, this is day one, and what this slide is referring to here on day one will be at the tail end. You got to remember the slight risk actually the day ones actually stop at 7 a.m., and the new day two would take over tomorrow at 7 a.m. So this is actually overnight tonight, and this is their threat as that warm front lifts north. Now, the tornado potential with this, let me just hold back. Let me just show you day two before I get into that. Day two, and most of you have probably already seen it, this will be the more leading toward tomorrow morning into tomorrow afternoon. So you got to remember to kind of separate the two because they have that constraint where they stop and start things at 7 a.m. So this will, the day one slight will lead right into this day two enhanced and moderate. And I think the time and the placement and the indications, the levels they have here are probably right on track. This is looking like a very large outbreak that will take place from Alabama all the way to Indiana and then swing toward the mid-Atlantic states. So let me take you through step by step. Tomorrow morning at 4 a.m., this is our old friend that's down and across the Gulf right now. It's sitting right here. Not a lot of shower activity associated with it supposedly here at 4 a.m. as this thing lifts back north as a warm front. Now remember, everything south of where you see these little showers popping up across central Alabama, I'm talking about Bibb, Shelby, over to Tallapoosa, down to Lee County. Anything south of that, down toward the Florida Panhandle in South Alabama, is going to start to destabilize. And I don't care that the sun's not out. This system is strong enough to where we're going to be able to overcome the fact that it's the middle of the night. So keep that in mind. We're going to start to destabilize rapidly below that. And what's going to happen between 4 and 7 is that we're going to see this thing pop up and be pretty substantial. Now this stuff is, I don't know if I'm necessarily going to call all of this severe. There may be some hail mixed in with some of this. Some of these storms will be elevated. Some of these storms will be north of the warm front. So it may be that if you're on the south end of where this was represented, let's say, I don't know, maybe Shelby County south, you may be in a zone that's more favorable for, say, some possible tornadoes, maybe weaker tornadoes at this point. Zones north of that would probably be more of a hail threat. They may be elevated. So we're going to have to deal with this, and this is part of the uncertainty that we're dealing with in the graphics. I don't know if you noticed the graphics window, timing window is 4 a.m. all the way, 5 a.m. all the way to 9 p.m. So we've got such a long window, and this is what we're talking about with that earlier section here, is this boundary list back northward. We're going to sort of be destabilized throughout the day. This is something we're going to have to deal with because it's developing over top of us. So this convection is going to be rather junky and messy, but I think there's definitely a window in here, especially as we get toward 5, 7 a.m., even toward 9 a.m., where it could be a potential problem. As we go to 10 a.m. tomorrow, notice that it starts to swing a little bit more toward Georgia, North Georgia. I'm talking about the junky stuff. While new cells begin to develop back across most of Alabama. We got to be careful with some of these cells. Now this could get dangerous because the low-level wind field is going to really pick up at this point. Remember, this system is still out over Arkansas, so all of us here are going to be way unstable and the wind shear is going to be very favorable. So I think we need to be really careful with these cells that develop mid-morning. I know that timing is a little bit auspicious and something that you're not used to, but we've got to be really careful with about 10 a.m. tomorrow. Then I think something unusual is going to happen. We're probably going to go through a little bit of a lull period in the mid-afternoon. I think we're going to continue destabilizing. I think the sun may pop out. You might have some cloud streaks and a lot of things may happen tomorrow afternoon, but we may actually go through a little bit of a lull around lunchtime to perhaps 1 o'clock. And there may be a few cells that develop. I know you see a few cells that develop. Meanwhile, this junkier stuff, the stuff with the other boundaries, sort of moved off into Georgia and South Carolina. But one thing I noticed about this 1 p.m. frame, and one thing that has me particularly worried, is that look back here in Mississippi. You see this stuff starting to develop back here across central and north Mississippi? That's a dry line. And that is starting to scare me more than anything else. So this is what is going to be, I think, our bigger and greater potential. So look what happens between 1 and 4. Notice that that dry line starts to really spark these cells. This may actually be underdone a little bit. So we're going to have plenty of instability tomorrow afternoon, especially by 4 o'clock, and tons of wind shear. So look at what happens between 4 and 7. These cells spark back up along this dry line. I think there's a big potential right here. And that's sort of why we got it oriented the way we do. So we have this elevated risk across the west and more of that moderate, significant threat across the eastern county. So this may be a rare situation where you guys out east are going to be under the gun, say, versus our Northwest 5, which it always seems to be. So I think the Northwest 5 may be actually a little better, in a little bit better shape with this event versus you guys who are along the 65 corridor going eastward. So I'm really nervous about that dry line sparking back up. I think our winds at the surface are going to veer around to the southwest. We usually don't see that happen with our tornado outbreaks. Usually they're strong southeast, but with this event and the fact that it's a dry line situation, they may be a bit more south, or perhaps even a little bit southwest, but there's enough turning with height. We just talked about the wind shear and turning with height. There's enough turning with height that I think, and enough instability to boot, that I think we could be looking at a possible rather large outbreak. I don't know if I want to word it quite that way yet. I don't have quite the confidence of how this thing will evolve until we sort of get into the situation. So I don't want to necessarily say it's going to be one of our larger outbreaks. But if you're hearing my voice right now, I want you to pay attention. That I want everybody here to take this very seriously, especially tomorrow afternoon once this thing really gets going. It could be that these storms are rotating like crazy and we just can't get them to tornado down. We don't have that. The science is not that good yet. Okay, I'll just be honest with you. That's some of the things we're working on with projects like Vortex. But what I can tell you is that these cells will be rotating, and there will be a significant chance that several of them may touch down, and we may have some rather large tracks. And again, this is a rather large outbreak. This thing will be going on from Ohio and Indiana all the way to Alabama, and all points in between. So I need everybody to take this serious. This is much more serious than the last 3 threats that we've dealt with over the past month. So that's my explanation as to why we have such a long window. It may turn into 2 windows, sort of that morning time when we start to destabilize. We may go through a little break in the mid-afternoon hours, say around lunchtime, and then I think we start sparking back up about 1 to 7 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. That could be the main show, especially for you guys who are on the 65 corridor eastward. be very careful with this one. By 10 o'clock, all this action has moved into Georgia, and we should be all clear for sure. Probably we'll move pretty quickly. So with that, I do expect this. I don't know if I have an anticipation that over our area that we would go high risk. They don't do high risks early on. They usually do them once things start to develop and they have a better handle on what is actually developing versus these computer algorithms that spit out the model data. So I can't be comfortable in telling you that we would go to a high risk, but I think the moderate risk, especially across our east, is justified. The hatched area is certainly justified. So all threats will be on the table here, including long track tornadoes. So we need to be prepared for that. We will be here. We'll be staffed. We're going to do a 2 o'clock this afternoon with the state partners. We'll have a governor's call as well later today, and so we'll be taking care of all that stuff. So with that, I will let you.
All right. Now, you've heard the latest information from Kevin Laws right there, and taking you out into the ops area. Our forecasters are continuing to pour over the model data that's coming in right now and get that forecaster out. We're fully staffed and ready to support you. In all likelihood, we will give another one of these Periscope briefings a little bit later on today, and hopefully be able to provide you some more specific details on the threat as the situation evolves. So call it a day right here, and let us get back to work and look at that information and get the latest graphics posted to our webpage. Follow us on on social media rather. Do we anticipate southern Alabama close to Mobile Bay will have favorable dynamics? I think the greater focus is going to be to the north, but there's not a zero threat in the Mobile area. So certainly everybody in the state of Alabama needs to be on guard tomorrow. That higher risk area is off to the east, I-65 and east. Certainly something we all need to be concerned about. I'm not going to be scared about it. Let's prepare and be informed, and then we can act and make good decisions based on that. So thank you all for being with us today. We'll be back a little bit later on. Have a good afternoon.